Hey, hello. Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We still have people coming in, and so welcome to folks as they come in. It's really exciting to have so many people coming together from across the state. Just had somebody sign in from Eugene. This is really fantastic. I want to start out by saying thank you to Jay Wilson, who created that wonderful flyover video you saw at the beginning and gave us permission to use it. My name is Nikki Mandel. I'm part of the CEI Hub Task Force, one of tonight's many sponsors, and you'll see a slide with those sponsors here in just a moment. We're part of a statewide coalition of community groups advocating for public and environmental health and safety. And there we go. I think we'll have those folks with us as soon as we get our screen share moving here, maybe. Or not. There we go. Yeah, thank you very much to all of these sponsors. The coalition around the CEI Hub has been growing over the last year. This isn't everybody, but we're just so thankful to all of these members who are helping to sponsor this event. If you can mute your volume if you're not speaking. Thank you. And just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this, and so if you don't want yourself to be seen on screen, probably you won't, but you could turn your camera off to be sure. Please do stay muted. We will be keeping the chat open for a little bit here at the beginning, then disabling it during the prepared marks from our panelists. And if I could have the next slide, please. Just a reminder of some basic etiquette for community conversations. Part of that is to keep your microphone muted through most of this. If you have questions, we will be taking those through the chat, and then our moderator will be asking them. So you'll have an opportunity to do that. So please be respectful of all of us so we can both get through this on time and hear what everyone is wanting to say. So we can stop sharing here if you'd like. Thank you. Our topic tonight is one of those kind of flying under the radar issues that impacts everyone in Oregon, whether they know it or not. At its most basic level, we're concerned about the safety and stability of the fuels that power our cars, the semi and delivery trucks, airplanes, hospitals, emergency responders, and many businesses across the state. As everywhere, there must be an environmental and climate aspect to any conversation about these kinds of liquid fuels, be they fossil or bio or renewable based. But here in Oregon, there's another very dangerous twist that gives rise to this event's title, Perilous Fuel Tanks, Oregon's Ticking Time Bomb. And that's really why we're here tonight. To orient those who are new to this part of the Oregon story, we're going to be focusing on what's called the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, or for short, the CEI Hub. And if we can share screen again, many of you are familiar with that. I'm sure I saw a lot of Portland people coming in, but for those from other parts of the state, if we could have the next slide, just a little map to kind of get us oriented here. Maybe next slide.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not advancing.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Little technology glitch here.
Okay. If it works, we'll go for it. The Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, the CEI Hub, is in North Portland, the west side of the Willamette River. And if there was a map in front of you, you would see that. It's supplied by a 400-mile pipeline from refineries in Washington's Puget Sound. A small portion of the state's liquid fuel also comes in via rail and barge, up the rail down the gorge and barge up the river. An extension pipeline carries fuel to a small terminal in Eugene, and then tanker trucks distribute the fuels from the CEI Hub and the Eugene terminal to virtually every corner of the state. So there we are. You can find yourself, I hope, on the map here on the state. So if you're familiar with the hub, you already knew that. If not, then hopefully this will orient you a little bit. So the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub is really the focus of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And so a question you might ask is, what's the peril in Perilous? to get us started on that, we're going to show a short video produced by Julia Bonheim for Resolve Northwest. After the video, I'll introduce then our evening's main event. And this is a short video. It's about 3.5 minutes long. So again, if all works well, our tech folks and co-planners will start the video, and instead of sitting back and relaxing, lean forward and pay attention.
Can you all see that?
This black screen right there. We go. Got it.
And I'm going to enlarge it. And ready?
Yep.
Portland, Oregon is facing an imminent catastrophe, and there's a 1 in 3 chance it will happen within the next 50 years. You've heard of the big earthquake that's coming, but have you also heard that 90% of Oregon's fuel is concentrated in Portland? It will be one of the largest oil spills in history unless we address our current situation. Pressure has been building along the Cascadia subduction zone since 1700. Eventually, it will cause up to a magnitude 9 earthquake, which is 100 times stronger than a Mag 7. When the earthquake does happen, it will devastate the coast and be felt throughout the state. The damages will be particularly extreme in Portland, a city with many vulnerabilities. Oregon concentrates 90% of its fuel at the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub along the Willamette River. The CEI Hub's combined active storage capacity is the equivalent of 530 Olympic-sized swimming pools of gasoline, diesel, tar, propane, chlorine, and more. The entire state depends on it, from transportation to how we cook our food and heat our homes. Most of the tanks were built between 50 and 100 years ago, with nearly all falling short of the current seismic codes. In 2020, Multnomah County and the City of Portland commissioned a report on the effects of the earthquake. They found that of the 397 tanks currently in use, 1/3 will fail. At their worst, the tanks will release 193 million gallons of fuel. That's 17 times worse than the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Except it will be in the middle of Portland. The CEI Hub was built on dredged river soil. In an earthquake, the soil will act more like liquid than solid ground. This liquefaction will destabilize infrastructure, causing tipping, sparks, and ruptures. Some of the tanks carry chemicals that will escape as fumes, threatening nearby neighborhoods. Friction from free-floating lids will cause some tanks to catch fire. Others will collapse and explode, igniting Forest Park. Pipes will burst, and oil will cover the river. Most bridges will fall. Infrastructure will crumble. And emergency response teams won't have access to the hub. After 3 days of burning fuels and toxic smoke, 45% of the fuel will remain to be cleaned up by hazmat teams. In about a week, the oil will have damaged everything along the rivers between Portland and the coast. What sustains us will be gone. Oregon's economy will likely need decades to recover as the city rebuilds. But we still have time. We need to work together. Let's 1. Make a full-scale spill response plan. 2. Hold oil companies accountable to risk mitigation strategies. 3. Ask for federal oversight of the oil companies. 4. Support risk bonding so they pay for potential damages in advance. 5. Decrease our dependence on the tanks and reduce our future need for them. And 6. Consider relocating the tanks that we have left. Finally, let's envision our ideal reality and create it together. We can still stop the spill.
Well, I hope that gave you a peek at what has us so deeply concerned. And now on to the main event. We're thrilled to have a moderator and panelists with deep and diverse expertise. Each of our guests will begin with prepared remarks. Then the moderator will open it up with his own questions and questions that have come from you through registration and that you'll be able to enter into the chat when it's re-enabled. And we'll send a note through the chat to let you know when it's reopened. So, to go on with it, I'm really honored to introduce retired Senator Michael Dembrow as this evening's moderator. Senator Dembrow's legislative achievements and interests are far reaching. He led on prison reform, educational access, immigration, and most important for our purposes tonight, was the lead sponsor and legislative cat wrangler responsible for the only state policy enacted to address dangers at the CEI Hub. So, Senator Dembrow, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for all that you've done. Nikki is a force, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know that. I also want to thank all the sponsors and all of you who have come to learn more about the challenges, the crisis at the hub. I saw a number of familiar names entering, and boy, I wish I could see you all. It's for some of you, it's been a long time since I've seen you. It's one of the perils of retirement. Actually, speaking of my retirement, my involvement in this issue actually began directly in 2021 when, as you saw from the video, Multnomah County and City of Portland issued a report that really showed us conclusively the dangers that are there at the hub. At that time in 2021, I knew that I was going to be retiring in a few years, and I just felt really driven to make sure that this could be addressed as soon as possible. It was time for the legislature for the state of Oregon to step up, and so started to work in that fall. Was helped enormously by a woman named Yumei Wong. Yumei worked for many years for the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, was chair of our state seismic resiliency commission, and she helped me to develop the legislation that ended up becoming Senate Bill 1567. And if you could put the first slide on, that would be great. And this will just be a visual of Senate Bill 1567, which, the stars aligned. 2022, when this bill passed, was a short legislative session. We have long sessions in the odd-numbered years and short, just 5-week sessions in the even-numbered years. And it is hard to get bills of major, complexity and major import passed during those sessions. But the combination of concern and just for a number of reasons, which I can go into at some point, but we were able to get it through, and it passed very handily, actually, in both chambers. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just give you a quick overview of what Senate Bill 1567 did. It authorized DEQ, our Department of Environmental Quality, to create a new program, the Fuel Tank Seismic Stability Program, referred to as FTSS, which regulates the tanks in Multnomah, Columbia, and Lane counties. That's where the big tanks are located, the big facilities, mainly around the CEI Hub, Multnomah and Columbia, but then in Lane County, there's a big pipe that goes from Portland, where the fuel that's at the hub is then transported down to Eugene, where there's a big facility that creates a big risk down there as well. Under the program, the facility owners are required to conduct seismic vulnerability assessments under DEQ direction. And the under DEQ direction is, of course, very important. So they're self-assessments, but they're using metrics and outside consultants that are directed by DEQ. Once they have done those assessments, they're then required to create and implement a seismic risk mitigation implementation plan. to harden or otherwise improve their tanks to bring them up to current code, and or to eliminate the facility. And this program is funded through a combination of our state general fund and also facility fees that are put on the facility owners. It also directed the Oregon Department of Energy to develop a statewide energy security plan, because as you'll hear in just a few minutes, this is not just a problem. It's a huge problem. It's a huge danger for the Portland area. But if we suddenly lose access to all our fuel, it is a huge problem for the state as a whole. And so it directed ODO to plan for disruptions in the state's energy supply in the event of a major earthquake. And it also stipulated that if it's recommending that tanks be relocated from the hub to other parts of the state, then they needed to consider the impacts on local communities in alignment with Oregon, and also to make sure that these were in alignment with Oregon's fossil fuel reduction goals, because we want to be reducing the amount of our dependence on fossil fuels. It also includes recommendations for future legislation, as well as annual regular reports to the legislature. Okay, next slide, please. You can go to the DEQ website, and under it, DEQ SS for seismic stability, you can find a wealth of information, and I would encourage you to do that. Okay, next slide. Now, what is the current status? In anticipation of this meeting, I talked to DEQ to get a sense of how things are going. And there are some, I think, important successes already. PDX, that is the Portland Airport, which is reliant on the hub for storing all the jet fuel, has committed to replacing all of its current tanks with tanks that meet the appropriate seismic standards. PGE, they have the Beaver plant in Port Westward. That will be decommissioned and removed. That was a final agreement that was reached just last week. Vigor Industrial is on track to eliminate all of it has 4 million gallons and capacity, and that will be removed in 2028. Research, analysis, and negotiations are ongoing between DEQ and the remaining 13, 12 of them in the hub. The other one is in Lane County in Eugene, with the remaining facilities. And those are slated to be completed by the end of 2026. And those will be followed by then a 10-year implementation to actually implement the plan with different deadlines in between. And there's also ongoing partnership work going on between DEQ and some of the other local and state agencies. And if we have time, I'll talk more about that. Okay, next slide. And then you can read all about the current state of affairs at the most recent report on the DEQ website, the status report from July 31st of 2028. And you'll see a link to that on the seismic stability website. And then one final slide. And this is really the theme of tonight's presentations. Much remains to be done. It's good that the Senate Bill 1567 is helping us a lot, or it has the potential to help us a lot, but a lot more needs to be done. And you're going to be hearing about that now. First, you're going to be hearing from Luke Hanst, who's partnerships manager at PSU's Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. And then he'll be followed by Kate Murphy, who's the senior community organizer for Columbia Riverkeepers. And then finally, you'll hear from Representative Tran, who took over from me in being the representative of House District 45, which I left some years ago before moving to the Senate. And Thuy is the legislative champion on this issue. So let me turn it over to Luke now, and you'll see me again at the end as we move into questions.
Apologize to everybody. I'm joining from New Orleans, so bandwidth has been a little unstable. So hopefully I'm coming through all right for you.
You are, Luke. Why don't you bring up the next slide?
Yeah. But as we said, Michael, organs, critical and all of organs, major fuel port terminals, transmission pipelines, and organs' largest bulk fuel storage facilities. Next slide, please. And as we'll hear more from Kate, but I'll go over a little bit here, the CEI Hub is threatened by catastrophic hazards, including seismic risks, like hazards that could disrupt.
Uh-oh.
So Luke, we're having trouble hearing you. You're breaking up a bit, so maybe it might help if you turn off your video. Are you still with us?
It looks like he's muted.
No, he's not muted, but he might have. Are you back, Luke?
Should we move to Kate and try and come back?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, the atmosphere may improve.
Okay, let's get Kate here and then fast forward a few slides.
Okay, Kate, tell me when I need to stop for your slides.
Mine is, yeah, it starts with the kind of a title slide.
Of course, now
Three or four, there are 3 or 4 more here.
I'm not able to advance that way, so I'm sorry. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone.
It happens.
Okay, what does your slide look like? The first one, do you know?
Yeah, the first one of mine is just kind of a title slide that says Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, a threat to public health and the environment.
Okay. There we go.
All right, great. Thanks everyone for your patience. So as was mentioned, I work with, for Columbia Riverkeeper, and Columbia Riverkeeper's mission is to protect and restore the water quality of the Columbia River and all life connected to it from the headwaters to the Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. So we're going a little out of order. So I'm going to just talk a little bit first about the potential types of disasters that can happen at the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. And I first just want to kind of lay the foundation that there's already a daily risk of exposure that exists in this area. And any disaster that happens in this area would lead to a cumulative exposure for people. And so there are many different risks for disaster that exist, and that ranges from earthquakes, accidents or derailments, explosions, flashback events, wildfires, and depending on the type of, and this is not an exhaustive list, but depending on the type of disaster, this could affect tens of thousands of people. Next slide, please. So it's important to think about the context of the vulnerable geography that this CEI hub is sitting in. So it's located in a very vulnerable area between the Willamette River and Forest Park, which is 5,200 acres. It's near the Columbia River, which is just 100 miles from the ocean, and it's also close to high density populations. It's in a wildland urban interface, so a dangerous fire zone. It's on highly liquefiable soils, so the soils in an earthquake could kind of turn to cake batter, and it's bisected by rail lines on both sides that are subject to derailment, and it's also located in a Superfund site. Given the geography, it's kind of on the edge of where there's a high risk for landslides, and the storing 90% of Oregon's fuel in this area is just a big vulnerability. Next slide, please. So there's a whole bunch of different types of fuels stored at the CEI Hub, and the result is a pretty toxic chemical cocktail. There's over 600 tanks with a storage capacity of more than 350 million gallons. And these different types of products can be kind of categorized into different areas. So we have refined petroleum, we have crude oils, renewable fuels, gases, and other products. And this also is not a totally exhaustive list, but it gives you kind of a good idea of the types of things that are being stored there. And then for context, a lot of these storage tanks were built before the risks were understood. And some of these tanks are more than 80 years old. So think like World War II era, they're putting highly volatile products inside them. And we have this situation where we've got 90% of Oregon's fuel stored with all these risks, and it's got the potential for disaster. There's a few other factors that should be considered in the case of a catastrophe at the CEI Hub, and that includes things like physical damage to the tanks and their containment structures, that the amount of fuels that are in the tanks at the time of the incident, the fate and transport of those fuels. So, like, does it catch fire or does it go into the river? And the seasonal variations and things like wind and weather and the river currents. And basically, this all goes to show that even if something does meet regulations, it doesn't ensure that it's safe and healthy. Next slide, please. So let's talk about air first. With the environment, we want to kind of know what we're exposed to. It's another toxic cocktail of contaminants, many of which are carcinogenic, which means they can cause cancer. So there's kind of another couple of categories. There's the criteria air pollutants, which many of us have heard about. And then there's these also hazardous air pollutants. And all of these have the potential to have negative outcomes for our health if we're exposed. And in the case of a catastrophe at the CEI Hub, aside from the impacts in the immediate area, the extent of exposure would be dependent on several factors. So regardless of those factors, a catastrophe at the CEI Hub would cause a large release of harmful emissions into the environment and could create kind of a toxic air plume in the area that could travel dependent on weather. Next slide, please. So there's also impacts to land. Spills on the land end up contaminating the soil and have a lot of negative effects on the surrounding people and wildlife. The cleanup's really difficult and can permanently damage the land. There's the potential for wildfires. The fire suppression systems in the case of a disaster could be compromised and not available. And then we have the effects of the catastrophe. Although they're dependent on many factors, one of those is our warming climate that tends to compound the risks of those fires. Next slide, please. So another category for environment is water. So when these types of things spill into the water, it's really bad. It degrades the water quality, of course. They're harmful for aquatic life long term. So this is not an easy thing to fix if it happens. They're very difficult to clean up. What we're finding out with a lot of these emerging fuels like blended, what they're calling renewable fuels, is that when they hit the water, they can separate. So the typical type of like floating boom cleanup would not be sufficient as the fuel separates and some of it sinks into the water column and requires a different type of cleanup, and we're just really not prepared for that at all. It can cause a lot of permanent damage to aquatic ecosystems, and the Columbia River and the Willamette River are home to already struggling keystone species like salmon, which are really critical for the ecosystems in our region, and they feed our southern resident orcas as well. So in the case, according to the 2022 Multnomah County seismic risk analysis, in the case of a 9.0 earthquake, the expected release would be huge. It would be equivalent basically to Deepwater Horizon. And 93 of these substances, or sorry, 93% of these substances are flammable. So this would basically destroy the lower Willamette and Columbia River ecosystems for generations to come. Next slide, please. I'm going to switch into public health now, and I'm going to try and buzz through it because I know I'm pushing my time a little bit, but there's several different types of exposures for public health. So there's direct exposures, indirect exposures, and then there's a lot of different factors that affect the outcome of those exposures. And you can see all those here. And then there's different, in particular for the CEI Hub, there's different opportunities for exposure. So things like routine operation of the hub, any accidental releases or use of those fuels can potentially be opportunities for exposure. Next slide, please. So it's really hard to capture all of the potential adverse health effects at risk from the CEI hub exposures, but I can say that all body systems are at risk. And these things can range from acute and chronic conditions to accidental injury and death. We've got things like reproductive and developmental health, cancers, brain and mental health, heart and lung health. And then we have a lot of people who are particularly vulnerable, the workers at the hub, children, people who are elderly, pregnant, chronically ill, houseless, low income, frontline, all of those folks are more at risk. Next slide, please. Just wanted to list a few of the additional concerns that come up when we think about catastrophes at the hub. So we have the potential lack of access to emergency services. So that could be like no capacity. It could be it's inaccessible to get to. So there's a lot of concerns around that. Then the other concerns of that broader lack of access to fuel services throughout Oregon. But there's a lot of different potential concerns regarding the public health aspects of this. And we could go on for hours about each of these things, but we're going to try and cover a lot. I just have one more slide. Next slide, please. So I think it's really important to talk about environmental justice as we talk about all of these things. And this is just a really important framing, I think. The history of this area is one of really disproportionate burden on frontline communities and displacement and harm to marginalized communities. And there's ongoing disproportionate burden with pollution now. So, we have issues like community members potentially being cut off from escape routes, concerns about displacing burden to other places. But basically, as we move away from these harmful fuels, we really need to do so thinking about just transition as a priority in our framing, because the risks of the CEI hub extend far beyond the hub itself, all along the transportation route and to other communities throughout Oregon. And it's a big risk to a healthy future for generations to come. So appreciate the time. And you can go to the next slide. It's got my contact info and our website if anyone wants more information. And then I'm going to have the pleasure of passing to, I'm going to see, I guess maybe we should try to bounce back to Luke and see.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
thanks, Kate.
have to stop screen sharing for a moment to go find Luke's slide. So bear with me.
Yeah, and are you all able to hear me so far?
Yeah.
So
I'll
far,
leave
so
my video
good.
off.
We'll get you
Fingers
spotlighted in
crossed.
just a moment so we can see you too.
Okay, I think I found Luke's first slide. All right,
Yeah,
you're up.
thank you. So yeah, thanks everybody for your patience and flexibility with this. So, as you've seen in the video, heard from Michael and Kate, Oregon CEI Hub is a critical node that contains all of Oregon's major fuel ports, transmission pipelines, and our state's largest bulk fuel storage facilities. Next slide, please. And you haven't heard any bad news, so it sounds like I can still be heard, which is good. So The CEI Hub is threatened by both catastrophic hazards, such as seismic risks, flooding, and wildfires. There are also other less catastrophic hazards that could disrupt fuel availability or cause fuel releases. These include things like technical accidents, human actions, wind, winter storms, etc. Next slide, please. So many disruptions to Oregon's state fuel system primarily involve damage to transportation infrastructure or fuel transmission infrastructure. For example, we saw in the recent Olympic pipeline closure how damage to transmission infrastructure can quickly undermine fuel availability. In other disasters, major route closures can result in fuel charge increases or localized fuel shortages. So again, looking at the recent emergency orders for the Olympic pipeline spill, we can see how difficult it was to address a single small leak on the Olympic pipeline. However, we know that a Cascadia earthquake threatens to cause, upwards of 250 breaks and more than 80 leaks on the Olympic pipelines, which would likely take many months to return the pipeline to working service. Next slide, please. So during a catastrophic disaster, a statewide fuel shortage will begin, due to damage to transportation and fuel transmission systems. At this time, first responders really assume possession of all remaining fuel supplies in the state, and the Oregon Department of Energy and the Oregon Public Utility Commission are then responsible for allocating those scarce fuel supplies according to the Oregon Fuel Action Plan and then incident command priorities evolving in the field. So because of Oregon's just-in-time delivery system, local fuel supplies will quickly diminish. It's generally difficult to provide exact estimates for how long this would take, but once these local fuel supplies are gone, fuel will not be available until new supply lines are established. Next slide, please. So for a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, we can see that God and everybody else is coming to Oregon after, as shown in this FEMA map here. But after a Cascadia earthquake, we know that support will be coming north along I-5 from Roseburg, west on Highway 26 and 20 from Redmond and Klamath Falls, and west on I-84 from Boise. Extensive damage to these roadways from an earthquake will require rapid road reconstruction efforts and limited route access. Estimates suggest it may take as many as 4 to 8 weeks until full-scale response resources really begin to enter Portland after a Cascadia earthquake. Areas closer to California and Idaho or further from the coast will gain access sooner, whereas geographic islands like coastal communities may take longer to receive fuel, but they'll also be a very high priority due to the tsunami risks, etc. Next slide, please. So as Michael talked about, the fuel tank seismic stability program will result in increased safety and fewer uncontained spills and fewer uncontrolled fires at the CEI hub, particularly during an earthquake situation. In an ideal scenario, this means that for folks in Portland, they'll have access to additional fuel resources in those resilient fuel tanks. However, because of those transportation failures that we've been discussing, this fuel, even if it remains in the tanks at the CEI hub, will not be available for the rest of the state. And without replenishment from regular transmission sources, it is not currently known how long this fuel in the CEI hub would even last local first responders. So, this really points to the need for increased energy security in the state of Oregon. Oregon Department of Energy's energy security plan that was discussed previously outlines a couple mitigation activities that could be undertaken. Some mitigation activities that I'd like to highlight include, next slide, please. Fuel diversification around the state. These are things like fuel depots storing between a few thousand and a few 100,000 gallons of fuel dispersed around the state to help reduce the fragility of the state's fuel system to minor and major disruptions. This is a snapshot from ODO's energy security plan where they went through a prioritization and identification process to think about where these other fuel sites could be. Next slide, please. Another key improvement that Oregon can do for our energy security is hardening electrical infrastructure to natural hazards. So this is things like improving the resilience of, I don't know why this phone is ringing so much on me. Improving the resilience of our high voltage transmission corridors. It also includes things like installing backup generators at critical facilities or other solutions like building resilient microgrids and other renewable energy technologies, all of which can help to alleviate energy gaps during disasters. Next slide, please. Another key mitigation activity that the state can implement is infrastructure hardening on emergency transportation routes. So we know that this is possible. We can build bridges to withstand earthquakes, but it's also very expensive. So some really critical mitigation activities here include bridge retrofits and replacements, as well as landslide mitigation in sloped areas. You can kind of see in this slide here how ODOT has prioritized routes where they're investing in seismic resilience of our bridges. But as you can see with the line graph, all of the orange there are the bridges that have not yet been funded. And so there's a long way for the state to go. All right, next slide, please. So the last thing I'd say is that it is possible to engineer both the petroleum facilities, such as at the CEI Hub, and the pipelines that are used to transmit this fuel. We can engineer these to withstand natural hazards and even a magnitude 9 Cascadia subduction zone. If we are able to reduce the number of breaks in our fuel transmission lines, we can help reduce fuel downtimes and reduce the risk of spills. And that's my final slide. So I think I'm passing it to Rep Tran. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Hi there, everyone. I am so grateful that you all are joining us today. My name is State Representative Thuy Tran, and I represent House District 45, which is Northeast Portland and a little bit of Southeast Portland. And I'm glad to be here. I'm also chair of the House Committee on Emergency Management and Veterans. So emergency management and what our state will do when the big one hit, or wildfires or tsunami, is keeps me up at night. Okay, just to say, you all hear me okay? Yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Good. Let me see if I have some slides there. Okay. First, I want to thank Senator Dembrow for his for laying the groundwork in 2022 with his Senate Bill 1567. But we still have a lot of work to do. And since he passed the baton to me, I am striving to prepare our state for when disaster happens. We talked about the CEI Hub already. It is very scary to have 90+% of the liquid fuel that is used in Oregon on liquefiable soil. And so with our state having a budget shortfall because of all the federal funding, we still need to move things forward. Let's see. The pipeline safety issues is also an important issue for us. That is federally regulated, which leave Oregon very limited. Let's see. I am supposed to talk about the past bill that happened. So in the short session, we did a bill that directed the Oregon Department of Energy to develop and implement statewide geographic diversity of fueling station, to have a priority action plan based on the energy security plan. But as you know, or some of you may know, it died in Ways and Means. So the directive this coming session is to create policy that move Oregon forward without a fiscal. So we're in a tough spot there. The bill, let's see, that we will be moving forward this session is called LC 126, and it will be working with ODO to flesh out the selection process. So we want to move forward the conversation on diversifying a few storage sites, okay? And we want to encourage the fuel companies who own those fuel tanks at the CEI Hub that it is in their best interest to diversify, not just for Oregon, but for themselves. But in order to, I don't want to say mandate, but nudge them really hard to do it, we have to prepare certain things ahead of time. For example, Odo needs to flesh out site selection process, certain metrics, deadlines, and accountability. When will they start the work? How will they make sure they're on track? How much will it cost? Where will the funding come from? Odo has to report and update the energy security plan. The next one is in 2026, then in 2028. We thought that they could use the current funding to move up the date and give us a report in 2027. But funding for Odo in Senate Bill 1567, as Senator Dembrow can tell you, was federal, and we cannot direct or repurpose that money. So we're going to have to pull the rabbit out of the hat and strive to get some emergency funding somewhere. So we're working with Odo right now to see what is the earliest they can bring us something without a huge fiscal that will kill the bill, which parts can be done now and which part can wait on. We don't want to delay the conversation with industry about the need to diversify the fuel storage sites, but we want to give them some potential sites as soon as possible. The good news is that the preliminary work was done as part of Senate Bill 1567. Odo contracted a study to identify fuel storage sites capable of providing fuel after the Cascadia subduction zone event, 201 sites. Statewide that are not vulnerable to environmental hazard, prioritized based on logistical factors. But that is not the end of the work. Odo needs time to investigate potential impacts to vulnerable population and ability to serve vulnerable populations' fuel needs. This crucial step isn't just managing
Do we have another freeze up?
Rep Tran, we've lost you, so
by the Senate Bill 1567 legislation, conservation and sustainability. And out of the 3 committee bills, 26 short session, one is diversification of fuel. Can you hear me?
Yes, you broke up, Thuy. If you could just back up maybe 30 seconds of what you were saying.
All right. Did you hear about the value of equity, conservation, and sustainability?
No.
No? Okay. Well, we got a lot of work to do, okay? And Odo needs time to investigate potential impact to vulnerable population and how to serve those populations' fuel needs. So that is the crucial part. And I was saying that I get 3 committee bills for the short session. One is devoted to the CEI Hub and diversification of storage site. The other one is to help in case of emergency to centralize the volunteer database with the Oregon Department of Emergency Management. And the third bill is to give OREM and ODEM the authority to start planning for recovery after a disaster happened. They don't have that authority as yet. So I hope those 3 bills together will move Oregon forward. Okay, so that's my part. You guys will have question and answer later, but feel free to contact me in the future, and we got more work to do. The question is, where can we find the funding to move these steps forward? All right. Thanks, everyone. I pass it on to the next person.
Well, I think we're all going to come on now as we move to the next section, which is questions. And Nikki, were you going to say something to people about putting questions into the chat?
I excuse me, I think there's a message going into the chat right now. We're reopening it. So if people do have questions in addition to what they already sent in through registration, this is a great time to start putting them in. Yes, thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. While they're doing that, Rep Tran, there's another bill that's going to be proposed this year that I think a lot of people are interested in, the one having to do with risk bonding. Could you say something about that?
Yes, Rep Isidore is going to be the chief sponsor of that bill, and it was one of the bills that was submitted last session that got stuck in Ways and Means. So right now, we're still ironing out the details. Nothing is in stone, and we haven't gotten the legislative concept back. But what we want to do is to match the previous bill was asking Oregon to match the risk bonding that Washington and California is doing. The number that I recall is 300 million per fuel tank. And that is for risk mitigation post-incident. And right now we're figuring out who will own the accountability portion of it and how that accountability portion is going to be paid for. We looked at how transport of fuel along the rail line was paid for by industry per gallon of fuel that was transported on rail. And we're thinking of doing something such so that the industry will pay for the accountability part of maintaining the responding. So I can't give you more information because the LC for that hasn't come back yet.
Right. But it'll probably be somewhat similar to what was proposed last time, right? And
yes.
let me
because the industry that we spoke with agreed on that. However, community was not 100% on with the amount. So we're going to look into it.
Okay. And just for the public, responding is something that people have been talking about for a while. I really want to compliment former Commissioner Sharon Myron, who really led the charge on that. The concern here is that if a high magnitude seismic event, earthquake happens, the question is who pays for the cleanup. And obviously there will be some, we'll all bear the expense to some extent, but a major responsibility needs to be with the facility owners. If they, some of them may well go bankrupt during, as that happens, or they'll try to rid themselves of the obligation. So it's important to have bonds in place ahead of time in case that happens, so that there is money that's available. So that is going to, I think, again, the reason that it failed last time was financial, budgetary, Rep Tran, because some work would have been required to create a responding program that had an expense, and because things were, people were so cautious about the budget last time that didn't move forward. I will say that was a benefit of 2022 when 1567 passed. It was unusual for the state to take on the responsibility for this new program, but it was a time where we had a lot more resources.
On the positive side, Senator Dembrow, we were able to turn a bill that was a a task force on responding to industry agreeing to do responding. So we're
Absolutely.
moving forward on that they agree that yes, it should happen.
Yes. So let's move into the questions then. In one of the first questions, and this came in earlier, is since the CEI Hub is in Portland, isn't this a Portland problem? And Senate
You
Bill
want me to
1560.
answer that?
Yeah, I actually I'd like all of you to answer. I think a lot of what Luke shared with us, I think, addressed this issue of this not actually just being a Portland problem, and I think Kate is as well. The ramifications are much broader than this. So
Yeah. I'm going to step back. If the CI Hub tipped over into the river or spark fires up to Forest Park, right? Not just will be damaged, right? The lack of fuel will cut Oregon whole economy off. And most worrisome is that the fuel that is needed to help those in need in areas that may be island by the disaster, be it the earthquake, the wildfire, then transportation will not get the services, the emergency rescue services there. Okay? If PDX had the fuel, then, and currently I think they're hardening their runway, then let's say federal resources can land in PDX and then can help, right? Or on the coast, military tanker can come to that area, but all of the western area of Oregon on the western side of the fault line will be affected. So if that pipeline that runs down 205 that you saw the map of is cut off, where is Eastern Oregon going to get its stuff, right? The capital in Salem will be moved somewhere, right? But how will we get resources to those that are affected by the disaster? And so it is in the best interest of the fuel company to diversify their fuel storage site. But because Oregon is such a small part of their portfolio, they won't do it unless we pressure them to do it. And so we're prepping, like I mentioned, with the legislative concept to help them with some information. But in the future, we're going to have to ask them very strongly to diversify because Oregon will be in a bad state when that happens. That's my take on it.
okay, thank you, Rep. Tran. Luke, share with us your thoughts about this as a statewide issue.
Yeah, and I think Rep. Tran's arguments were all, spot on. The fuel shortages will affect the state. The hazardous material releases or the fires could, go beyond Portland and cause direct effects that way. I guess one thing that I'd add when we're looking at the CEI hub and then really all of the hazardous materials in Portland, or the majority of them, Portland's a port town and it's a hub for these transportation networks. The fuel that comes to the CEI hub goes to the rest of the state. The hazardous materials that come in through the BNSF rail yard alongside the CEI hub go all the way to the East Coast. So the risks that are placed on Portland residents are not just so that Portland folks can have fuel and access to these materials. It's Portland is at a higher risk so that the rest of the state can have fuel and the rest of the country can have hazardous materials. So I don't think it's fair to say that this is Portland's problem when I think it's even a broader economy that has kind of placed this in Portland's backyard in the first place. So I think that's what I'd add there.
Yeah, and I'll come back to you on that. the challenges of Portland being that port city. But Kate, you want to add to the sort of the broader statewide, regional, global components of this?
Yeah, it's certainly not just a Portland problem. It's not just an Oregon problem. This is a threat to an entire regional ecosystem that we're talking about. And I want to also like set a little bit of framing that, industry greenwashing is a big threat to public health. The industry is really skilled at confusing people about what's good for them. And as we move forward with solutions and trying to think about how we're going to strategize about reducing harm and reducing risk in this area, I think we need to be really mindful of what this industry is good at as they, offer up alternatives to the traditional fossil fuels. But yeah, there's so many different implications, thinking just about our shared airsheds and watersheds. I've seen a couple comments from folks in the chat about Vancouver, and this is totally going to affect Vancouver. I mean, folks who live in this area don't see rivers as borders. And so we know very well that we can see the other side of the river. We know that these airsheds and watersheds are shared. We know that this would impact long-term health of aquatic life and the aquatic ecosystem, which is hugely important for tribes, and they have traditional treaty rights that allow them to fish in these areas and gather. That would be hugely detrimental. Everybody upstream would not be seeing healthy fish. Downstream, we have this keystone species I mentioned in the salmon that's really critical for supporting a whole bunch of other species in our region, including our southern resident orcas. This stuff in an earthquake would make it all the way out to the ocean and start affecting ocean species as well. So the fishing industry, I mean, if people like to eat seafood, it would affect them. It just goes on and on. And I just think, we also need to be thinking about future generations because this is a long-term issue. It could do long-term damage far beyond when we're still here. And so, yeah, there's a lot of reasons it's not just a Portland issue. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the challenges, Luke, I think a lot of people would say, well, let's just move the facilities to other parts of the state. You had talked about having depots for emergency purposes, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I applaud Rep Tran for pursuing that. But how do you respond to the argument? Well, just decentralize the hub and move it to safer parts of the state.
Yeah, this is a really thorny issue and one that I think causes a lot of contests between folks. And I think it's probably above my pay grade to have the final solution for it. But it took a really long time for the CEI Hub to be built where it was, and it was built where it was for a reason as well. Like we know we built it on liquefiable soils and on this dredge that's really, not going to do well during an earthquake. But when we built it, we didn't know about the seismic hazards as much. What we did know is that this has great access to the river, access to the pipeline, the Olympic pipeline, and getting fuel from the refineries in Washington. And then Portland is a really important transportation hub that connects to the rest of the state. So it would be, I think, immensely challenging for, all of these fuel companies to be organized and encouraged to totally like dismantle the CEI hub where it is and redistribute all of this fuel infrastructure around the state. And I think that we would need to do more investigations into the risks associated with that and the costs associated with that and the timeline that would take. If we're talking a 10-year timeline or a 15-year timeline to mitigate tanks at the CEI hub, would it take 25 or 30 years to rebuild all the tanks somewhere else? What do our fuel needs look like at that time? How do we determine the locations that all of these things are put? I think I tend to come towards, the CEI hub is where it is, and the best thing we can do now is mitigate it in place and continue, a green energy transition where we reduce our need for these fossil fuels in the long term.
Yes. Kate, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I would agree with really focusing on reducing our use of these harmful fuels, and also just would highlight there's a lot of concerns over displacing the burden of pollution into other communities. The industry loves to be on the river by rail lines and by roads. That's what they are after. And when you look for alternatives, there's just really, that's also often where you find the liquefiable soils. So it's really a difficult topic, but there's a lot to think about. I think the primary thing we should focus on is reducing our dependence on things that we know to do harm.
Mhm. And along those lines, one of the things that may be happening is moving as part of our climate action, moving more towards renewable fuels from fossil fuels. My understanding is that that doesn't necessarily alleviate the risk. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of alternative fuels that are kind of being put forward right now as bridge fuels, and I just want to first frame this as like the industry has used the bridge fuel narrative as a tactic since I think the 70s, has been introducing their latest upgrade as the necessary and critical bridge fuel to get us off of this previously more harmful version that was being produced. And so we need to be mindful of these tactics being repeated. When you look at the actual data that we're starting to see come in, it's not as promising as initially a lot of the industry would have had us believe. And when we see, like, I don't have a lot of access to widespread, like broader data right now. I've focused more on Zenith here in Portland, but we do see kind of, you know, not the drops in critical emissions that we would hope to see as they transition off of fossil fuels and onto what they're calling renewable fuels. Aside from the any emissions benefits, if they're increasing the amount that they're producing, that can consume a lot of the potential emissions benefits of a one-to-one transition. And then on top of that, a lot of these renewable fuels still carry the same risks as fossil fuels in terms of accidents, spills, explosions, flammability, risks all along the transportation route, and things like that. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks. Anything you want to add to that, Luke?
No, I'm not really much of an expert on the renewable fuels, so I'd defer to Kate on this one. The one thing I'd say is that the literature is very clear. If we can replace it with a less hazardous material, that's a great thing to do. But if these aren't less hazardous, then we should know that and go by the science rather than the name.
Hmm. Uh, so a question came in. Given that California and Washington require liability bonding, as we had heard, um, would it make sense for all three states to jointly negotiate with the tank owners? And so I guess the question I would have is, as you understand it, are so the fuel that comes into Oregon is for the most part refined up in the Puget Sound area. Um, and are they equally vulnerable to to a major earthquake? Uh, in which case, should we be coordinating our actions more closely with them? I think we are with the state of Washington just because of the Columbia River and the proximity of Vancouver. But do you know if there are any conversations happening between us and the Seattle area?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So we do know that the fuel refineries in Washington are subject to the same seismic hazards. I can't speak to their specific, site conditions for which ones have liquefaction and which ones don't, but we can expect damage at the refineries in Washington for sure. And I do know that, Washington Ecology is the state department that oversees their kind of seismic stability program and that risk bonding aspect. And I think that they've been working closely with Oregon officials to help us navigate like what is it, how is Washington implementing this? How can Oregon implement this? We learned a lot from Washington Ecology during the rulemaking for Senate Bill 1567 to establish the fuel tank seismic stability program. We met with them and learned from the process that they'd been going through and implementing. So I do think that collaboration is taking place. I'm not sure I could speak directly to the financial liability kind of coordination there, but there's definitely a need for increased coordination across jurisdiction lines, especially when we think about things like emergency response and recovery as well. There's could be situations, for example, this is a hypothetical where Portland is better able to provide resources to Vancouver, given how quickly Oregon was able to rebuild our roads, and maybe Washington's focused on Seattle. So how is Oregon helping Vancouver in that situation? So there is a lot of coordination discussions to be had with the state of Washington, and some of them are taking place, and I think there's always more to be done.
Yeah. Speaking of conversations and partnerships, Luke, you're involved with the PSU's Institute for Sustainable something or other that is partnering with DEQ and some of the other agencies, right, to have to plan for actions around these challenges, but not just the hub, but other things that need to be looked at, as some of those that Kate mentioned, such as the danger of fire in Forest Park and, the roads. I mean, conversations with ODOT, et cetera. What's happening there?
Yeah, so um, and the partnership with the DEQ has moved to the civil engineering department too. So that's some good news I can share with everybody. But so yeah, we're supporting the fuel tank seismic stability program. One of the key things that we've been helping them do is these interagency coordination meetings that we started last year. The key goal that we're really working on is bringing together different public agencies and people involved in first response, to get a better understanding for the post-earthquake scenario effectively, especially at the CEI Hub and the other regulated fuel facilities. So it's been in things like going to infrastructure managers like PBOT and elsewhere to get an assessment for the bridges and the roadways in the CEI Hub, the water system in the CEI Hub, the wastewater, all of these different lifeline infrastructure systems that we know are really important to allowing for response and recovery. So to do things like fight fire at the Forest Park or at the CEI Hub, you're going to need access to water. But we know that Portland's municipal water supply has some really severe seismic vulnerabilities, and so we have that, we can we can say Portland's municipal water won't be available after an earthquake. And now we're starting to have conversations with our first responders, the fuel facilities and others about, they are required by Senate Bill 1567 to have some capabilities for firefighting and spill response even after an earthquake. And so now we're going through this process of really getting a clear understanding for the public sector's infrastructure and first response capabilities after an earthquake, so we can have a better sense of what we need to require these fuel facilities to maintain themselves. And so that's really the core of what these coordination meetings are focused on. And I'm happy to kind of share more information with folks on those, if that's helpful.
That's great. Yeah. And in a couple of minutes, we'll be talking about how we can, what the next steps are in terms of outreach and connecting. And, as the three of us are talking, I'm seeing all these questions come in that clearly we don't have an opportunity to answer. But I think there will be plans to put together to share these chats, and so people's thoughts will be captured, but then also to develop frequently asked questions kind of response for the future. But Senate Bill 1567, as I mentioned, I think we always saw it as a first step. And in fact, the legislation directed DEQ to make recommendations for future legislation in 2024 for the 2025 session. And as was mentioned, 4 bills came out of that. None of them were able to be moved forward. But from from your perspective, Kate and Luke, let's imagine for a moment that you are in charge of the world. What do you think should be prioritized in terms of next steps for the legislature? And I will say not only the legislature, because again, this is not just a state legislature issue. This is a city of Portland issue. This is a city of Vancouver issue. This is a county issue, a regional issue, et cetera. So in terms of, as we move towards asking people to communicate their concern to, political entities, what should they be prioritizing, do you think?
Well, it's hard to be an expert in all of these issues, but I think what makes sense is to look at it through a filter of harm reduction. So when things get proposed, whether that's new infrastructure, new capacity, things like that, asking the question, will this reduce harm in a real world way, not on paper because we've changed the math to make it look like it'll reduce harm through an emissions reduction or something like that, but something really tangible that we know where we're going to see real results and harm reduction. If the answer is no, I think we should have a policy of moving forward and looking for other solutions. Generally, I think that's, without diving into the details of there's so many necessary pieces to that. But I also just want to, if I could, just go back a couple of questions to the question about the conversation between Oregon and Washington, and just wanted to highlight that tribal consultation is really critically important and is often not done or not done properly. And I just want to highlight that as something that is not only required, but something that we all can benefit greatly from. And so as we move forward, making sure that we slow down and make sure all of the voices who should be at the table, particularly in high-level conversations, are there before we start moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that tribal support really helped us to pass Senate Bill 1567. It was a real priority for them. Luke?
Sorry, this is a big question, so it's
Yeah.
had me spinning a little bit. But I I tend to go towards like a yes and approach with this sort of question. I think it's as many solutions as we can figure out and apply all at once, and as many different activities that we can advance all at the same time. So on an individual level, if that's something like joining your neighborhood emergency response team, and developing your 2-week ready store and being ready to share food and water with your neighbors, and having having medicine set aside, and knowing which of your neighbors need more support in an emergency, like that's a critical thing that has to happen in every household in Oregon. At the same time, I think that we need to do a lot more research into, other hazardous materials and other, secondary effects of the earthquake. We know about these geographic islands that are going to take place. We know about the widespread transportation infrastructure issues. And I think those transportation infrastructure issues really threaten a lot of lives. Especially in the response and recovery time period, as people really are going to have a hard time getting fuel to hospitals and other emergency response things. So I think that advancing emergency transportation route resilience is really important. And we've seen a couple people in the chat talk about evacuation routes, and I think that's really important, because when we look at a hazardous material release, some of the main personal protective actions that people can take are evacuation, shelter in place, and decontamination. And an earthquake challenges all three of those. And so anything that we can do to help communities be prepared with hardened evacuation routes, with maybe community shelter areas, or different, again, storing water everywhere that we can so that it's available for decontamination, that sort of thing. So there's a lot that people can do at the individual level, and then at the state and county level and whatnot. My bias is really towards those lifeline infrastructure systems. I think the more that we can do to harden our roadways, our bridges, our water, and our wastewater systems, the better able to respond and recover from a disaster any kind of local place will be. So that's what I would fix.
Thank you very much, Luke. Both of you, Luke and Kate, Rep Tran has had to leave, so I'll thank her privately, but just on behalf of everyone who put this together, thank you for sharing your wisdom. And let me turn it over to Nikki, back to Nikki, who's now going to say some things about outreach and kind of next steps for us all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Senator Dembrow, Luke, Kate, Rep Tran, who's left. Big round of applause. Thank you so much. I so appreciate, even though I'm deep into the weeds sometimes on this, I so appreciate the breadth of what you've all talked about and really the clarity you've used to explain it all. And also, especially here's some of the steps we need to think about in terms of mitigating the dangers and preventing more harm. So this really reminded me of really how complex, how dire, but how complex and costly this problem is. And I just am also reminded, as Luke noted earlier, that even without a disaster, we've had this recent break still, under repair in Washington, and the governor had to declare an emergency here in the state of Oregon. So it just is a reminder of how vulnerable we are, even without the pending disaster. But I would say that fortunately, we're not helpless. As we've heard, there are a lot of things that can and should be done, and we can all help to make that happen. So while it's fresh in your head, and please bear with us, I'd like you to take a minute and jot down two things. Like before you turn to the next event tonight, jot down two CEI Hub issues that you're most concerned about, or maybe two actions or policies that really resonated with you that you think are needed or should be considered. And I'm going to actually ask us to just be quiet for a minute, stay on the call here, and just jot some notes to yourself. And if you feel like putting any of those notes in the chat, feel free to do that. Next slide, please. We ask that you not just hold this within yourself, but that you spread the word to friends, neighbors, community groups you're part of. Until we know there's a problem, we can't really begin to address it. And as Senator Dembrow said, we also need to reach out and let our government officials, our elected representatives, to know our concerns. They really do need to hear from you, and they do listen to us sometimes. So unless we let our voices be heard, they won't be able to listen to us. So by way of encouragement, as Senator Dembrow mentioned, we do plan to send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with a link to this recording, a short list of sources, and some of an FAQ to address some of the questions, because there were so many that we couldn't get to tonight. And we won't be able to answer all of them, but we'll try, and especially the ones that were frequently asked, we'll try and answer those for you. Please use the information from tonight and that you'll be receiving hopefully in the next week or two, again, to spread the word to your elected representatives. Let them know that you know about the hub, that you're concerned about it. I hope you are. And what action or actions you think will make Oregon safer, your local community safer, both from the potential disaster and also to make our fuel supply more resilient. And a reminder that those could be actions that are not only at the state level, but at the local level. In addition to your state representatives and senators, we have a governor who hopefully will want to hear from us, local city and county council people and commissioners. And our follow-up message will include a link so you can figure out how to contact those folks. So it's been 3 years since Senator Dembrow shepherded through the first step, the fuel tank seismic stability program, towards kind of mitigating and trying to prevent a CEI Hub disaster. It's been 3 years. We really can't, we shouldn't wait any longer. So let's not let this turn into one of those, oh, there were lots of kind of unheeded warnings disasters. We're so happy everybody's here. We're all together right now, and we can help to build that critical mass to propel forward the actions that are needed to defuse this ticking time bomb before it explodes. So in closing, if we move to the next slide, I really just again want to thank everybody, especially those of you who are here with us, those who will be watching this because they registered but couldn't make it and will watch it later. I especially again want to thank Michael Dembrow and our panelists who, in addition to giving us their time and expertise tonight, continue to work on these issues daily. Our coalition of community sponsors and the planning team that I worked with and have made all of this possible and moved us through some of the glitches. So again, thank you all very much, and stay safe and help the state stay safe. Thanks and good night.
Good
Thank
night
you, everyone.
and good luck.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
That was
Excellent.
great. That was great, Nikki.
Superb. We appreciate you. We love you all.
On December 16th. Turn out on December 16th for the rally and for testimony.
Yes.
It's super important for the next step of this.
Do you guys know if anybody is planning for what to do if there isn't FEMA support because of some of the federal government threats? I don't mean to sound paranoid, but
it's real. You should be.
Ouch. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, just one more reason we hope the earthquake doesn't happen soon.
I mean, it's good to hope for things. It's better to prepare for them. But so, but is there I guess that means nobody has nobody has any information or preparation on that. Okay.
I believe one of the bills that Rep Tran is planning to carry through her committee, that's not a CEI Hub specific bill, is related. I don't know if it's related to FEMA money being gone, but it is related to more emergency resilience. So you might be in touch with her office. Let her know that you're concerned about that and find out. She may be, either moving on that or I know she'd be interested in your input on that.
Okay. All right. And then do we know of what are like the best kind of like newsletters or news information sources to make sure we're staying connected as this issue shifts and changes? So
I will put into the chat the email address for the CEI Hub task force.
Okay.
And we're not necessarily the best and only source, but you can send us an email and we will send you some resources and try and keep you. We have an update that we send out about every month, and we'll add you.
And Nikki does the update, which is phenomenal. So it's really worth.
Awesome.
Hey,
this
Lori.
is awesome. Well, I would love to stay connected and stay involved. So I will definitely shoot you an email because when I was doing emergency preparedness previously, one of the things is they didn't know what was in all of the tanks. This was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And is that still a concern? I don't know. I know you guys got places to go. That was one of the ones I was like,
stick that in the chat and we will try and answer that in the FAQs. Okay.
And River, to answer your first question, COIN, for those of you that are involved in the statewide indivisible network, COIN will be following these bills and endorsing these bills.
Oh, awesome.
And so we will be asking, we'll be sending regular updates and asking our members to letting them know when there are hearings and when we need their testimony submitted and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate it. All right. I'll shoot you guys an email and you guys have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. We'll stop the recording now and
I was
enjoy the rest of your evening.
That you have a very myopic view of what's actually going to happen. and the fact that we're going to have to throw away a great deal of the rules to overcome the immediate problem of the disaster, and all of this was done, we assume we're going to just use what we do now a little bit better, but it's going to be a total different picture when this earthquake hits. The number of bridges that will stop all transportation on the river. We really have got to sit down and have a bigger picture what this fuel business is going to do